Welcome to our second episode of the Shark podcast. Today we have two guests. First, Greg Finn, who is a Port Stephens based abalone and urchin diver and line fisherman. And also our very own Stefan Sornock, who runs Invade.
Very own.
Yeah. So, I guess, Greg, let's start off with some questions to help our listeners get to know you on a sort of personal and professional level. So, what does fishing mean to you, Greg, personally?
It's pretty much a pastime that started off as a young kid living in Port Stephens and over time turned into a second career for me. I was a registered nurse for 20 years and parallel to that worked as a pearl diver over in Broome, and that was sort of my introduction into commercial fishing. And for quite a while I worked as a commercial abalone diver in New South Wales as well as working as a registered nurse. So the fact that commercial diving, the abalone, incorporated a lot of data collection and it was sort of scientifically driven on catch setting, it sort of fitted into the nursing career that I was having where we were collecting a lot of data. So immediately I really enjoyed that aspect of commercial fishing. But over the years, with shift work becoming a bit of a burden, I ended up transitioning across my 100% of my working life now is commercial fishing, line west, which is out to 100 fathom line in New South Wales waters, and sea urchin and abalone diving. I really enjoy it.
Great. So, I mean, that's a huge amount of time you've spent in and around the water. So these days, now that you're full time and mostly doing abalone and sea urchin, what does, I guess, a day of fishing consist of for you?
It depends on the conditions. If the conditions are potentially, you're not totally sure what will be the following day, typically it will be get up at sunrise, have a cup of coffee and go and look at the ocean and work out whether you're heading north or south. The boat's generally already packed, ready to go. And I come back and grab my deckhand and off we go. And it really just depends on what the sea's done overnight as to which option that you select. With commercial fishing, to make money, you have these bunch of options. So it's about selecting the option that gives you the greatest opportunity. And during the course of a working day, depending on the water clarity, the currents and what the wind's doing, you might change your pre-dive plan to suit the conditions. And it's all about creating what's my best opportunity to make or have a good catch to make money. That's pretty much how my day operates. And from the time I launch the boat until the time I unload my catch, pretty much that's all my brain's thinking about all day. I don't think about anything else.
So I guess if we're talking an average kind of day, I know that's an impossible question, but on average, how many hours are you spending in the water?
Yeah, so a typical abalone diving day would consist of, for me, 5 to 6 hours in the water. And within that day, there might be up to a 1 hour boat travel to get to the location. And then there may be a little bit of time moving around spots, a little bit of time on deck relocating the drift, maybe helping the deckhand to pack some of the catch, which might take up another 2 hours, then the hour back. So a 5 or 6 hour dive event quickly turns into a 10-hour day.
Wow.
And then you've got the unloading catch, the post-landing report, the paperwork, the refuel the boat, the clean up after the day. A lot of the days are typically pushing 12 hours if you go out and spend a day commercial abalone diving.
Gee whiz.
for me.
So we're talking hundreds of hours a year, easily, in the water.
Well, just off the top of my head, based on working, I think I'd work between sea urchin diving and abalone diving. I think I'd be definitely spending 400 or 500 hours in the water a year, and in a pearl diving season, we used to do 500 hours in 3 months.
Wow.
So it's a lot of time in the water.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of your listeners might be thinking, gee, that's a lot of time spending time in the ocean. What I find really hard, it's actually the boat travel. It's the boat trips that knock you around. It's not the actual time in the water. So as I've gotten older, I'm trying to reduce the amount of boat travel and be a little bit more strategic about when I tackle the bigger days, because you can't flog yourself every day and not start to feel it. But yeah, look, when you enjoy what you do, you overlook the lesser enjoyable aspects of the work. And yeah, I like the work, and yeah.
So, Greg, when you're doing the diving and the collecting, are you on hooker or do you have like a motorized cage?
Yeah, so in New South Wales, abalone fishing, we use surface applied air hooker hose. We don't use shark cages because a lot of the country that we're working for blacklip abalone are in fairly cryptic habitat, so a lot of boulders, and some of the more offshore country is a little bit more open, but we don't use cages, unlike the South Australian abalone divers who target greenlip abalone in open paddocks, very flat bottom, very exposed. And it's a lot quicker to swim around on a hose without the encumbersome use of a cage.
So I guess physically you're more vulnerable if a shark decides to make your day worse.
Absolutely, and it's really comes down to having a healthy respect for potentially what may or could occur in our day-to-day work. Some of the places we work are quite exposed offshore, adjacent seals, lots of current, and they're places that you would expect to see a large white shark. In saying that, we also work a lot of protected headlands, and there's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't bump into one in some of these inshore headlands either. Probably water clarity is a big factor. If you've got clear water, you feel a lot more confident. I'm also aware of hopping in the ocean and being a bit vulnerable on the way down and obviously coming back up. So, but when I'm basically doing the work, I rarely think about sharks.
Okay. So has the presence or activity of sharks actually affected the way you go about your business at all?
Yeah, there's a headland that I mentioned to you when you interviewed me some time ago, called Yakaba Headland, North Head at Port Stephens, and I've had quite a few interactions with sharks, quite aggressive sharks over there, and that's a headland that I try and work once a year. It's got a lot of really rich algae-rich habitat, and the abalone grow really well there. So I'm really conscious of the fact that I've seen some quite aggressive sharks over there, bull sharks and white sharks. So I do feel a little bit exposed over there for sure.
Wow. So, I mean, I guess aside from that instance that we reported on last time I interviewed you, have you had many sort of close calls with sharks while you're working?
Very few, given the amount of time I spend in the ocean. I've seen a lot of sharks over the years, but Port Stephens is renowned for being a white shark nursery, and I've seen quite a few white sharks from the boat, and I've seen a few in the water, and most of them have been quite inquisitive. I don't feel threatened in any way, but we are getting some very large, aggressive bull sharks. And a lot of local spearfishermen are having some fairly aggressive encounters with bull sharks over at Tomaree Headland, where there's a lot of land-based game fishing going on, and they're becoming a lot less. Well, they're being seen more frequently. They're a lot less hesitant about us being in the ocean with them, and they're invading our personal space. So I would give a shark a healthy distance. They're not giving us the same in return. They're invading our personal space.
So, I mean, since you spearfish as well, do you notice that sharks are more likely to invade your personal space when you're spearfishing versus when you're working? Like
Absolutely. I think they're tuned to the sound of the spear gun going off.
Oh.
And bull sharks, if you see a fish and you take aim and pull the trigger, I'm finding that the bull sharks are coming straight in just on the sound of the trigger mech going off. And a lot of blokes are finding that to be the case around Southwest Rocks and up north of Southwest Rocks around Grassy Head and Scott's Head. There's a high instance of predation of line caught fish by wreck fishers and commercial fishers up there. So like Queensland, we're now experiencing a lot of loss of catch due to shark predation for sure.
Mm. Wow. So like that chunk sound underwater.
All it takes, and they're there.
Wow.
And it almost makes you second guess if you've seen one, should I pull the trigger? And no one wants to have a interaction that ends up being a bite, blood loss, the risk of injury. So unless you're sort of one of these gung-ho, young, no fear type personality people, as you get older, you get more risk adverse and you just think it's just not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And whilst it's exciting diving and there are sharks in the area, once upon a time you could safely land fish without losing it to a shark. Now you're actually feeling quite vulnerable yourself. And I know the Shark Smart app that DPI produced has got some very informative information around what not to do and what best practice looks like in reducing a negative sort of interaction with a shark. And I think it's a useful education tool, and a lot of people are quite fascinated by some of the tracking that's going on, how far some of these sharks swim in a short period of time. And that's really handy. But a lot of the places that we fish and dive are away from the beaten track where that data is being collected. So a lot of typical listing devices on public beaches, that's not where we are. We're in quite remote areas. So we don't have that, I guess, safety of a drone from a surf lifesaving club or an app that tells you there's a shark in the vicinity, because there just isn't the listing devices where we work and fish. And I don't expect that to change due to logistics and cost. So really it's up to the individual fisher or diver to do their own risk assessment on what the risks are for that day, and I guess be mindful that we're in a domain where you may come across an aggressive shark for sure.
So I guess on that then, given your experience, do you have any tips for people who might be new to spearfishing, in terms of how to properly assess the level of risk that they might experience?
It's a great question, Owen. And so my experience would tell me that the factors to look out for me, number one is water clarity. I think late afternoon and early morning are two peak periods with low light. I think they're dangerous times. Tide change is another one. I think anywhere where you coming into contact with large schools of fish such as mullet or salmon in particular is another risk factor. I would never urinate in my wetsuit. I was told by an old-time abalone diver, don't ever urinate in your wetsuit. I think anyone that's had a lot of close encounters have all reported that they've been urinating in their wetsuit. So it's certainly worth avoiding that if you can. And if you're burleying to try and attract a kingfish or a snapper, and you're doing this in quite dirty water in the hope of luring a kingfish, well, potentially you could be luring a shark as well. So just probably be mindful of that. And whilst burling's a great technique to try and increase your opportunity to get something really, really good, I think having a buddy diving system where one person's watching and one person's diving is a smart move. And just looking out for one another and being aware of what's going on around you, not just what's in front of you. But you consider towing a boat to a boat ramp, being on a public road and reversing a boat down a boat ramp with cars coming and going. A pedestrian accident with a reversing boat or a car accident on the way to the boat ramp, I think is more risky. So I think it's all about putting it into some sort of context. And if you try and avoid particularly dirty water and that late afternoon diving and avoid salmon schools, I think there's 3 practical things that you can do to mitigate risk.
That's awesome. Thanks, Grant. I'm sure that's very useful information for people who are new to spearfishing. Especially since I think more and more people are probably doing these kinds of sports on their own. Like ever since clubs sort of decentralized a lot, the individual people sort of pick up their phone and think, hey, this would be cool. I'd like to go spearfishing. That's really helpful information. So is there anything else you think that people could do to reduce risk, like wear certain things or?
I think one other trick that I've picked up over the years is if you do see a shark, make eye contact with it. They tend to turn and swim off in a hurry, in a panic. I think is definitely the wrong thing to do. I think you should confront the shark, and I think you should try and maintain contact with the shark as much as you can by eyeing it. And I think try not to panic. And if you can raise attention by holding your spear gun out of the water, or try and get your boatman or a boat nearby to come and collect you. I think it's about making eye contact. Look, there are a lot of products on the market. There's Shark Shield and Shark Band, and I haven't looked into any of it. I maintain that because I spend so much time working in the ocean, if I feel the need to have some sort of shark shield attached to me that's just going to slow me down all day, I'll give it away. I'll go back to nursing and take my chances there. I think for me, with the knowledge I have and the years I've been doing this, I'm quite comfortable continuing the work that I do without having to invest in other measures to protect myself. But that's just my personal view. I think if having something like that gives you some sort of reassurance and it makes you more comfortable and gives you more enjoyment for your sport, I think go ahead and do it. It can't not help.
So you think that maintaining that confidence is a big thing as opposed to sort of freaking out a bit?
Absolutely. I believe strongly that if you're in the water with a purpose, doing something that's deliberate and not struggling, you're not a floundering boogie boarder splashing around circles waiting for a wave, that you're actually in there deliberately doing something, I think that sends a message to sharks in the area that you're doing something. And I have spoken to a lot of commercial occupational divers about this, and we all agree that we're in there doing a task, and we're working hard. You can hear the regulator, the demand valve, the bubbles, the noise. I think that in itself is a great tool to mitigate risk. But if you were splashing around looking like a wounded seal, I think it's going to raise their attention. So to go diving with a bunch of novices who aren't comfortable, not that I've ever put this to the test, but I certainly would feel a lot more comfortable that my level of risk would be a lot less, given there are other people in the water who are less confident with that.
Yeah, okay. So I guess in your inner circle of people who do similar work, diving for abalone and stuff like that, have many of them had, negative interactions with sharks that sort of put them on notice a little bit, or are their experiences much the same as yours?
Well, we've all got our own different stories, and look, most of them are just a white just appeared and it swam around us and it disappeared, or a white cruised by and never even stopped and just kept going, or I looked up and there was a white in front of me and I could have reached out and touched it and it cruised off. I've heard lots of those stories. Poor old Eric Nerhus, New South Wales abalone diver, diving down Cape Howe on the Victoria-New South Wales border in December. I think it was early December, diving with his son, deckhand, was on the bottom in the weed, scooping up abalone, moving forward and swam into the mouth of a 4-metre white pointer. And this white pointer tried to eat him. And it broke his arm, broke his nose. He's got puncture marks in his back, in the back of his head. It tried to eat him head first. And what protected him was the fact he had a weight harness on. So the bite of the shark biting into a lead harness protected his vital organs. The shark tried to have a second bite to really wolf him down, and he stabbed the shark with a abine as best he could, and he tried to get his thumb in its eye and really eye gouge it to let him go. And it basically just spat him out, and his mask was off his face. He had a bleeding nose. He could just open his eyes and see this white looking at him, sitting underneath him as he made it back to the surface with blood everywhere. And luckily, his son was right there and managed to pull his father into the boat.
Wow.
And he believed that he was dead, that this shark was going to eat him. If it had a second go at him, it would have. But that's the most harrowing story I've ever heard. And I recall seeing the photographs of his injuries, and it just makes you, I guess, have a healthy respect that what we're doing isn't a hobby, it's a job, it's hard work, it's dangerous work, and it's just a horrible thought that you could be eaten. You could go and work on a construction site too and fall off a building or get crushed or have a hammer fall from a scaffold above and hit you in the head and kill you. I mean, there's so many risks in everything we do. So it's about, I guess, rationalising the risk and making a judgment call that's based on your own risk profile. Am I willing to take this risk? And for me, it's yes, I'm willing to take the risk. The boat travel is more dangerous in my view. Having the deckhand reverse over the top of me and kill me with a prop is more risky than a shark trying to eat me. And that's how I mitigate the risk in my mind regarding sharks. But everyone's different, Owen. And if you're someone who likes to just play the most the easy road and try and live a fairly bland sort of life, and you're happy doing that, then great. But there are a lot of people out there doing bland sort of jobs that, they get on their weekends and their holidays. They want to go and do something that's risky. And, I wouldn't go rock climbing, and I certainly wouldn't skateboard, and I wouldn't be a big wave surfer. So it's all about what you're confident doing. And if you're a water person and you've grown up in the ocean, as I have been lucky to do, it's a lot less risky for me than someone who's new to it. But I think the biggest thing is, if you're interested in spearfishing, I think it'd be really healthy for people to consider joining a spearfishing club and getting to know some experienced members and learning from them, and wherever possible, diving with other experienced members, because it's the quickest way you'll learn. And I think it's a great sport. Fishing in general is a great sport. And I know there are millions of people out there that will agree with what I'm saying. It's a great sport. We love fishing and we love being out in nature. So I don't want to turn people off. I think it's just important that you're aware and do your own risk assessment on the day, and you should have a great day and catch something great and get home safely.
So I guess if we're talking about having a good idea and being able to do your own risk assessment, clearly that means having more information around the issue should be helpful. And I have to ask, in this instance, do you think there's value in something like Shark, where people can see, whether there's more or less depredation events associated with spearfishing in a location before they go there?
I think to document that would be really useful in being able to, I guess, spatially manage the risk. I don't know if that's the right way to term it, but I think Stefan will understand what I'm trying to say there. If we can have some sort of a spatial management tool where we can see where the higher instance of that is occurring, then maybe that could also factor into where we select to go. And if there's a place where that's occurring on a regular basis, well, that might be the place we steer clear of in dirty water, but certainly go to when the water's clear. And we might insist that on those locations, we've got someone in the boat watching us rather than just anchoring the boat. That would be useful for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, hopefully, given the parameters that we can collect information on using Shark, that people would be able to gauge whether this is a place that's safe to go on your own, or if it's definitely a buddy situation, given the conditions on the day. So yeah, that's good to know. So what do you think of the community of practice that we're trying to build around this kind of data that we're collecting via Shark? Do you see much usefulness in that? Like trying to get commercial guys and rec guys, researchers and government people all sort of, I guess, workshopping this issue that is shark-based depredation together.
I think any sort of data that gets collected has to be important. I think the richer the data, the better. And I don't believe it needs to be something that only commercial operators collect or are required to collect. I think independent fishery surveys conducted by research scientists have their place as well. But I think everyone has a role to play, and if rec fishers can contribute to that data set, it can be compared with the experiences in data collected commercially, and then cross-reference with the surveys that get done, and also, if they want to run some independent research data collection, well, that costs money to do. Of course, it's quite expensive, but there's no reason why the data that's collected through citizen science can't be just as accurate. And I think it's not about knowing to the nth degree what the instance or the risk or the kilos or the time is. I think it's all about seeing what the trends are. And we just need to be able to look at the trends and see where are those trends tracking and what's causing those trends to move in that direction. So I think more data, the better. And if we can collect it cheaply and voluntarily, even better.
Great. Well, that ends the questions I had set aside. Would you like to say anything further?
I've got some questions because I'm really enjoying the discussion here. Like I think you're really kind of digging deep into the heart of what's going on here. I do have a couple of questions just to tease out some of the points that you made there. So as a fisher, are you using a lot of technology in that, like, you know, sounders, GPSs, all that kind of stuff, or are you sort of a very old school fisher?
It's a combination of both, Stefan. Inshore, I'm always using a sounder, mainly for water temperature. I like to know what the water temperature is doing, and I'm also interested in obviously the depth. And if I'm going to anchor up current of a structure, well, I want to find the structure and work out which way the current's going and just anchor slightly up current of it. And if I can find the bait and anchor adjacent the bait, even better. But temperature and depth is important. GPS not so much, because I know the area and I've got spatial awareness from landmarks where I am. But when I'm working further offshore in deep water, GPS is very important. In addition to that, our commercial vessels in New South Wales use sucker fish, which is a data logger essentially that basically, you know, talks to satellite every 10 seconds to give us a GPS location. So, you know, we've got, you know, like a track on your GPS. This collects, I guess, a breadcrumb track of where we travel, which gets fed into data collection for abalone fishing. But I also see that as being useful for the broader commercial fishing industry, not just as a VMS, but as a data collection tool. So I run one of those, it just basically operates when I turn the key of the vessel on. That's pretty much what I use. I'm not a great, even though I've got a commercial line fishing license, I wouldn't say I'm a good commercial line fisherman. I'm a learner, but I've got access to people who are very good at it. So hopefully some of their efficient practices will rub off onto me. But any help that you can give me, Stefan, I'd be very. I'd love it.
On that front, do you feel like that tech and the noise that comes from that tech is having any influence in this, that the sharks are sort of becoming aware of, you know, the pings from sounders and things like that?
I reckon they'd have to, because I've noticed that the pinging from a 1 kilowatt transducer, I actually turn it off. Like if I'm operating in less than 30 meters of water and I find exactly where I want to be and I anchor and I'm happy with my current direction, I start burling, I switch the thing off because I'm sure it's having a negative effect on my catch rate. I think the pinging's almost sending a broadcast signal out there to stop, to create a bit of a buffer. So it makes sense that a shark could then use that ping as a signal to come over, a bit like a ringing the bell with a Pavlov's dog. I think outboard engine harmonics definitely have an effect. And there was a recent, and you know, please delete this out if you want to use it, I don't mind. Al McGlashan posted on his Instagram a picture of him deliberately skip baiting a mullet to attract a white pointer to his boat for a photo opportunity. And when I saw that, I straight away thought, well, okay, what you're doing is you're educating white sharks to be lured by food to a boat and become comfortable with the outboard motor harmonic, all for a couple of glory pics and look at how good I am on Instagram. Now, I complained about that with DPI senior executive, and the points that I made were that is a deliberate act of associating food with outboard engines, and the risk is that you're going to create a behavioural change in white sharks. It's well documented, it's been happening, and someone's going to get predated upon when they hop in the water. Some young kid hopping off their parents' boat, boom, white's going to be there. And the policy legal department looked into it, and you cannot deliberately interfere with a protected species, whites being a protected species. You cannot deliberately interfere with them, and that's the law as it stands today. So that's effectively deliberately interfering with them. Now, let's be sensible about this. If listeners are thinking, well, what happens if a shark comes to my boat when I'm fishing? That's not deliberately interfering. That's just going about your business of fishing. But if you use skip baits to deliberately draw them to your vessel to take photographs and brag about it, I think you'll find that they can be prosecuted for that and they'll get a big fat fine. So I think it's about being sensible. I think it's about being practical. And I have no doubt that engine harmonics are a factor in attracting sharks to vessels with the promise of food.
Yeah, and I'd actually, without knowing the specific incident, I'd generally be in agreement that we have to be mindful of the fact that this is an animal that is capable of learning a behavior, and all the evidence that I've seen documented through research, etc. Sharks are really quite intelligent critters. Like they're not just roaming around reacting, instinctively. Like they are capable of learning and managing the behavior, as particularly if they find it to advantage. So I think that the message there is literally just we need to be mindful of the way we interact with these things and not encouraging those kind of behaviors. I think that's just common sense, because it's not necessarily that you're going to carry the consequences of that somebody else might down the track.
Absolutely. And we've got to think about avoiding the risk. And, I just worry about young kids. That's all. I just worry about creating a new behavior in sharks and them having a learned behavior that's going to create a lot of negative publicity about sharks, and it's going to cause people injury. And young kids are vulnerable because they don't think about the consequences of just jumping in without looking. And look, there's been a couple of abdivers in other states eaten when they've hopped in the water. Literally, they've hopped in, boom, they've been eaten because a shark's been attracted to the vessel, and it's happened when they've hopped in the water. So hopping in the ocean is a real risk. And I think if we've got this sort of culture of food associated with engine harmonics, I think that's something that could be an emerging issue that we need to try and mitigate the risk associated with it.
Well, I certainly know that this is an issue in and around places like the Whitsundays, where you've got lots of cruise crafts or yachts or whatever, and you've got a mix of adults, families, whatever on the boat. So I know that this is an issue. Now, one of the points that you made there really early on was you were talking about that there are aggressive sharks or whatever. What does that actually look like? So how do you know that a shark is in a more aggressive versus a more passive mode, or a more investigative mode?
Pretty much a shark cruising doesn't pay a lot of attention. It's basically looks quite streamlined in the water. But when a shark's got its pectoral fins down and it faces you and it arches its back, that's a real signal that they're aggressive. And sharks that become too close. So I'm saying any shark that, if you reach out with your spear gun and the length of your arm with the spear gun in your hand gives you 2.5 meters of reach, I would say to anybody that no shark has any business being within that radius around you. So if you reach out and you know your measurement of your arm extended with a spear gun, with the tip of the spear is 2.5 meters, that's the radius. That's your personal space. That belongs to you, not the shark. And that's another bit of advice that I believe that to be strongly, that that's your space. So if a shark enters that space, I would consider that shark to be aggressive.
And that's actually interesting, because you noticed the change in the body position, the change in the pectoral fins and things like that. Those are clear visual cues, and I actually quite like the idea that there is a space around you that should be maintained, because 2.5 meters, most sharks can close that distance pretty instantaneously. So it's not a lot of space around you, even at 2.5 meters.
No, I think that's got to be the minimum. And, look, really, maybe you should be tripling that. But for me, I've told my son, who had a shark come within his personal space, and I felt helpless because I watched it happen, and I had a kingfish on the end of my spear, and the shark basically swam up past the kingfish and went straight to my son. I basically said, mate, they have no business being within the length of your spear space. So I wouldn't advocate shooting a shark. I think you could potentially escalate things. I think prodding it's enough. Making eye contact, prodding it. But yeah, I think discharging a spear gun on a shark, I think, can open up high risk, particularly for someone near you. The shark might start snapping, and it won't be you that bites, it'll be a mate next to you. And I think it's important also for listeners to be aware that if you feel threatened, I don't think spearing a shark is advisable. I think it has to be an absolute last resort. But I think prodding it's fine, and I think that's enough to let them know, hey, back off.
So that's the reminder for them to respect your personal space. It's sort of look them in the eye and give them a poke.
I think so. Yeah, for sure. I think the eye contact, number one. If they're going to invade your personal space, poke them. I wouldn't spear them. I think spearing them potentially is going to cause somebody to be injured.
Well, most things in the sea aren't going to poke back, so for the shark, then that's kind of like an instant cue that you're not a normal thing that they're going to be targeting. Basically go look somewhere else. And I think that's really, really sound advice. One of the things that comes to mind there, though, you're underwater, you're seeing a shark, and particularly if you're a newer diver, in that space, you're relying on your air supply, etc. How important is it to kind of just keep that rhythmic breathing and not kind of escalating within yourself, that tension?
I think that's pretty hard, Stefan, because
you're still an animal.
I think they're going to sense your heart rate, and I've travelled in a pretty strong southwest wind across Disaster Bay with my deckhand. His eyes as wide as saucers, and we've got sheets of white water, and a lot of weight on board, and this is real I'm alive sort of stuff when you're going across Disaster Bay in a 35 plus knot sou'wester. I remember doing it one day and actually feeling my heart rate, and I was as cool as a cucumber because I'm confident in my vessel and my ability as a skipper. But I guarantee my deckhand's heart rate was going through the roof. I could see it in his face. So everyone's different, but if you feel totally in control, those sorts of situations, you can maintain your pulse rate. But in the ocean with a shark, you just don't know what you're going to do. I mean, your heart rate could go up out of excitement, not fear. You could be excited. Oh, wow, look at this. This is amazing. It's not fear, it's excitement. So, yeah, I think, yeah, just try not to panic, and I don't want people listening to some of the stuff that we've discussed and think, oh, this is too risky. Let's just bring it back into context that being a pedestrian, driving on public roads, that's risky. We don't want to wrap people up in cotton wool, because we've got to remember we're Aussies and we're mad down here, down under, and we do lots of wild things. So
I was bush bashing in snake country the other day, so yeah.
Yeah, but spearfishing's a fun sport. It keeps you fit. It's been good to me. I loved it. I don't do as much as I should, mainly because I spend a lot of time in the ocean anyway, working. But yeah, it's a great sport. It's a healthy sport. It's a selective sport. You're very selective about what you take, and we're very limited by how deep we can dive, because most people, we're limited within 30 meters of water. So I think it's a damn good sport, spearfishing.
Actually, Greg, let's so if you get good at spearfishing, clearly you're going to start catching fish. Do you have any tips for catch management to sort of minimize the smell of blood around you, and make a shark hungry?
Yeah, so there's three things associated with that. One is kill your catch. Don't let it struggle. So, icky jimmy it with your knife or break its neck. Don't leave it struggling. Put it on a float away from you, so that it's over there. It's not on you. Don't ever attach it to your person. And if you can, remove it from the ocean. Stick it straight in the icebox. So if the boatie can come over and take the fish and put it in the icebox, that's the best thing to do. But yeah, definitely don't have fish on your person. And I think it's important to actually kill the fish. Don't leave it struggling.
Right. So kill it immediately, and maybe use something like one of those little speed sticks to thread it off the line onto a float.
That's the one. And keep it away from you. Don't leave it dangling around your feet.
With just thinking through to, there's a whole range of reasons why you might have an injury underwater beyond sharks. What do you maintain in terms of, gear on the first aid or whatever on the boat, so that if something does happen, you're covered?
Yeah, so I've got three things that I keep on my boat, and I keep them there just out of habit for multiple uses, and that's gear that I use in my day-to-day working life. It's a roll of electrical tape. It's I have these 8mm ropes with a spliced eye on them, but they're called strops. So I always have some strops on the boat, which are about 2 meters long with a spliced eye on them, and they're just used for multiple things. And spear gun rubber. So look, if you get bitten, you can use a strop as a tourniquet pretty quickly, and it will work very effectively as a tourniquet. I've also got a spear gun rubber that would do a similar job, and electrical tape if you have a cut or something. I've had injuries, multiple injuries over the years, where I've just simply cut the finger off a glove, put it over the cut finger, and wrap it up with a bit of electrical tape, and I keep working all day. And when I get home, I go and get properly attended with first aid. That's what I do. I find with first aid kits in boats, particularly open boats, I find them a waste of time, because what happens when you go to use it one day, it's all moist and it's all condensation's gotten into the box and everything's just ruined. And in an emergency situation, you're not going to stuff around with a bandage and a combine. What we need to do is stop the bleeding. So an 8mm piece of rope used as a tourniquet is going to work a lot quicker and a lot more effectively. And in addition to that, I've got all the gear that I'm required to carry by AMSA, which is an EPIRB, smoke flares, handheld flares, radio, and all those bits and pieces. So, but yeah, that's what I have. I've got practical things that will do the job. And
So your professional advice as a nurse is essentially go back to bush nursing.
pretty much, like it's about stopping the bleeding immediately.
Yeah.
Another trick that you can deploy, particularly if you had a lower leg injury, is you can if you've got someone in your boat that's been bitten. I think I've been told that the best thing you can do is lay the person flat on the deck of the boat and put the blunt part of your fist over their femoral artery and keep your arm straight and basically lean on their femoral artery with your fist. Now that acts to be a fem stop. So in nursing, in coronary care, they use a thing called a fem stop, which basically is a pressurized inflatable fist, if you like, that you put over the femoral artery to stop bleeding. So what you would do is you'd use your fist, you keep your arm straight, and you'd lean over that femoral artery to suppress the amount of blood flow from that affected limb. So if it's a right leg, right femoral artery, obviously left femoral artery. And that's something that we can all do. And it's simple and it works. And that will stop someone going into cardiac arrest.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is fantastic. That's the sort of stuff that people need to know. Because the thing is, you don't want to be Googling that when something goes wrong.
You don't buy that. You don't buy one of those in a first aid kit.
No.
We've all got them. We've got two, one in each hand. So we carry fem stops with us. And you'd be buggered if you're on your own because it'd be pretty hard to do it yourself.
Yeah.
But you know, I think that's probably a really practical piece of advice that people should be mindful of and talk about with their crew.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a horrible conversation to have, but hey, it's got to be done.
Look, I think this conversation has just been absolutely packed with practical stuff. That's I think what's really important is that you've got that real world knowledge and experience of dealing with these things, and you know, risk is reduced just by knowing in advance what the problems are and what the potential ways of dealing with them are.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Greg. Those are super practical tips. It's
no
just,
worries, fellas.
you wouldn't never read it off a brochure.
Anyway, look, I appreciate the fact that you're putting some effort and thought into this. I think it's just great. So I hope you get well supported. And like I said before, I like helping wherever I can, and I think it's got to be a partnership where we all do our bit to help. So thanks, Alan, for asking me to contribute today. Appreciate it.
Real pleasure, Greg. Yeah,
it's been fantastic.
Absolutely. I guess we'll just end the podcast and the recording there.
Yeah.
On that note.